Hello everybody, let's give it a little test just to make sure everything's going okay. Here it is. Good stuff. Just having a little check. So yes, as agreed, here we are. It's admittedly 4 minutes past 6 here, but that should be close enough. Well, some of you should know the drill by now, but basically, any reasonable, appropriate questions and I'll answer them, and if you want any of it in a video, I can certainly look into that as well. Depending on, of course, the topic, if it's something that warrants a broader discussion or if it's just something that needs a quick answer. And we'll go from there. Let's pop a bit of music on there. Or should we? Should we? I don't know. Pop this on from there. And I'll keep the chat ready. So, let's see who's around and ask your questions as you see fit. Let's just see. I've got someone. So yeah, to the person who's watching. So basically, like I said, just really any questions within reason. So on to topics like historical European martial arts. I don't know whether you sorts of people enjoy more sort of fancy types of topics, like when I was talking about in my last video, whether, how you could defeat robots with medieval weapons, whether that was exciting, whether you prefer more grounded in reality types of topics, such as, things like when I was explaining the qualities of things like chainmail armor and brigandine armor and that sort of thing. I'm not 100% sure, so in fact, let's have a test. I'm going to check you guys can hear me properly. I'm not getting a response. No one's messaging anything. Testing. Should be able to hear me. No. Hello everybody. Let's check, see if it's working this time. Oh dear. Body. Let's check, see if it's working this. Good. Right then. So yes. Now it seems you guys can hear me. Hopefully the questions can start and I can answer as you see fit. So I don't know if you need to get inspiration to kick off certain questions or topics. But like I was trying to say earlier, I was looking at sort of fantasy topics like, fighting against robots with medieval weapons. But I didn't know if you wanted something more grounded in reality, like the sort of discussions I was doing about mail and brigandine armor, or if you liked those sorts of fantasy topics, if you prefer to go down the realms of maybe Tolkien-esque stuff, like dwarves and hobbits and fighting dragons, or whether you actually wanted to more talk about, actual history. Because obviously I'm here to grant wishes, and I'm happy to go either way, really, and of course I'll be doing bits on both anyway, but I don't know which you guys prefer more, to be honest. Oh, if anyone's here. Come on. Alright, then I'm going to lump it on Facebook then. At the moment, I seem to be the only person here. This is embarrassing. Last time there were quite a few people. Well, by quite a few, I mean some short few. But still. Aha! We have an arrival. Excellent. Right, so I don't know if you've just joined. In fact, I wonder if it's saying one watching, if it actually just meant myself. Yeah, yep, I was on my own. It said it's now saying two, unless it's a coincidence. Anyway, I was just saying, I was looking at different topics. I was looking at things that were grounded in reality, like sort of brigandine and mail armor and those sorts of things, and then looking at other topics such as, fancy topics similar to what I did in my last video. The fighting against robots and medieval weapons. I didn't know whether you guys preferred the sorts of fantasy-style topics and going into the realms of the impossible and trying to tackle it in a logical way, or whether you preferred stuff that was more based on actual history, like medieval England and Europe and whatnot. I didn't know which you guys preferred, or just generally, what things you guys want in terms of topics. See how the response goes. Oh dear. I'm just realising it's a bit ironic that I've got a video in the background for a bit of motion when I was doing my practice out in the rain that I obviously turned into a video at one point. When at the moment it's a sweltering heat outside. Oh, right. Am I likely to do any more archery-related topics? Now, I love doing archery. It's not like I've gone off it. It was an interesting thing because I, budget-wise, had to choose between going to training in historical European martial arts or going to practice for things like archery. And I just so happened I thought, well, I'm doing quite well at archery. This was back when it was my main thing, and took up HEMA, so I sort of didn't do it as much anymore. But I more recently got a sort of archery target. So the problem is a lot of the straw ones that you can just buy cheap can only take up to about 20 or 30 pound draw weight before they become they basically just pierce through even we're talking field points, which are designed not to pierce too much into targets. They still end up just going all the way through, and it ruins the fletchings and all sorts. But now I've got a proper one, I can probably set up something in my garage and perhaps indeed talk about archery and, of course, actually do so. In fact, yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe what I can do, Gate, is I could perhaps do some practice. I can talk about the common question that seems to come up a lot about, can someone with a bow properly pierce plate armor and other types of armor used in medieval Europe? And perhaps I can have that in front of the green screen and then have clips that are relevant of me using my English longbow. And then have that as a sort of background, or even just talk over it in separate clips. Either way, I could perhaps look into archery related topics if you guys want that. it's just none of you guys. To be honest, I hadn't considered it actually. It caught me by surprise. I mean, I knew about people wanting things like Anglo-Saxons and topics like that, but no one's ever mentioned archery in all this time. But by all means, I'll certainly look at doing archery videos. Bit of an idiot for not realising, to be honest, because I suppose bows and archery are quite popular, and I've talked a fair bit about close combat weapons. So yes, apart from looking at things like perhaps if bows can penetrate certain types of armor with their arrows and those sorts of topics, were there any sorts of topics and themes that you wanted me to look into or answer specifically, or did you just mean in general, broadly speaking? I can't remember when was the last time I did an archery video. Probably be back in a day when I was, well, back in my early stages of the channel. There's stuff like the fast shooting attempts. Ooh, back in the day. That's a fair point. Yeah, admittedly, I'd need to probably join back up into the same. This is the problem. That's when I've been asking for funding on Patreon. Look into doing these kinds of things. Basically, what I'd need to do is probably join up. I mean, I have a few options that I had back when I was doing archery. There's stuff like field shooting with an organisation in Britain called the National Field Archery Society, or NFAS for short. And that's it's supposed to simulate hunting. You have these sometimes sort of box paperback targets with, lined areas drawn in the shape of an animal, and it's a bit like hunting in a woods. Or you have these sort of 3D simulators, and basically one of the things I loved about field archery was that it was a proper environment in the woods. So you'd be shooting uphill, downhill, sort of through peculiar nooks and crannies, and kind of getting those awkward shots. And it's a test of skill in that sense, because you're not just on a flat plane. Here's a target at a set range. It's sort of various ranges. You've got the wind acting weird. You've got, like I say, the uphill, the downhill, and sometimes little obstacles and things in the way, and kind of stuff like that. So that would certainly be something I could look at. Or if you're talking about in a big open field, one thing that might be cool to show you would be something that's called clout shooting. Now, clout shooting is where you're basically in the middle of a big field indeed. You plant a flag in, and it's just a simple matter of you doing these long distance shots with your bow, and you're trying to get those arrows as close to the flag as possible. And of course, when you're talking about such ranges, unlike a small target, you're starting to talk about having the sort of string or some other measurements and trying to find out how many meters you are away from the flag. And of course, you can get an idea of how consistent you are and how accurate you are at potentially trying to get to the flag. And even with properly experienced archers who've been doing this sort of thing for years, at the extreme ranges we look at, I don't think I've ever seen anyone get sort of close and about a meter away, which is really good accuracy, don't get me wrong, but I haven't seen anyone sort of doing what's called splitting the wand and actually hitting the flag. Perhaps it's probably happened, but not that I've ever seen. Mind you, I've only ever properly partaken in one, and only sort of seen videos and sort of looked at stuff showing a few others. And I was wondering, actually, I mean, I personally love all sorts of projectile weapons. I kind of like to experiment around, but I didn't know what you guys liked. If you preferred I stick to bows, or whether you liked some of the things I've done in the past about using slings. Whether you'd be interested in me looking at perhaps javelins if I can afford them in the future, or crossbows, of course. I didn't know if you'd want me to I mean, heck, if money wasn't an object, I'd absolutely love to do some clout shooting and try in general with various archers, or myself and maybe a few friends, like my best friend Ryan, try a few things like crossbow and bow and compare them, trying to shoot at long range and talk about, maybe some of the advantages and disadvantages they have. How the arrow or quarrel flies, and how easily you can sort of use the head as sights or whatever. And of course, what sort of power and poundage you can get for a flatter shot, with each other compared for the same strength that the user has. It would certainly make for some fascinating topics. So yeah, I'm definitely going to do some archery topics later then. In fact, I might do some later today if the sun doesn't set too early. So again, I ask. I mean, well, any particular sort of topics you wanted covered? Because of course, apart from showing footage, actually that's another thing as well. I think. I mean, I didn't know if you guys always wanted me to do quite a few other, sort of more professional historians did, and actually talk about, topics and do things like, discussing history of archery and those sorts of things. Or whether if you actually liked videos like where I was just slinging, or when I'm doing things like test cutting or doing archery practice, where there's no actual lessons or any information being shown, but just the raw footage happening. I don't know if you guys preferred that, or whether you preferred the information and sort of talk topics as well, sort of as an overlay or in a green screen, whether you preferred just the raw versions where I'm just cutting bottles up, or just slinging stones about, or just shooting things with bows. I'd be interested to know, which you guys prefer. I'm also interested to know right now how many people are even watching. Oh, up to 3. Nice. So yeah, what do you think? Right, I see. I suppose it makes sense that if I did just do certain topics on their own without any, sword swinging or things like that going on about, it could probably get rather boring. But yeah, so in that case, I'll definitely try to get more actual action. Yeah, I'll have more action-packed videos. In fact, again, I'd certainly want to try and find a field, or perhaps even I guess I can build my channel up from the ground again and start indeed in my garage, like you said earlier. And perhaps I can do things like shooting bottles open, and yeah, I could do a video perhaps similar to the test cutting for start, just as an initial video. And I could do something like shooting the bottles apart with a bow, and I can just have my actual archery target as a backstop and just split them and do all kinds of things. And then from there I can move on to perhaps another fast shooting attempt. I mean, I did 2 attempts to see how quickly I could shoot the bow, but I could perhaps do a 3rd attempt now, especially since I haven't done any archery in a while. See if I've slowed down, or whether I've still got it, so to speak. And then again, I mean, I'm not wanting to constantly talk about money, but obviously things like Patreon funding would help, because it would really help if I could do things like join the National Field Archery Society, or the FITA, which is Fédération Internationale Tir à l'Arc, which is, International Federation of Archery. And with those sorts of groups, I'd be easily able to, I mean, if they cost about £50-60 or something a year, and I'd be able to join up an archery club, pay a couple of pounds or something a time. But I'd get back into practice. better with proper groups of people, but I could also partake in those events, like, as you say, you know, those large open spaces, so I could be doing some outdoor target archery at greater ranges than my garage. I could do clout shooting, splitting a wand, coconut shy. I could do all kinds of, you know, crazy stuff. Because, I mean, I know fields and places that are good for shooting, but the problem is, of course, it's illegal to just bring a bow out, stick up some targets or something and start shooting, especially since a lot of these fields potentially are going to have either next to them or actually in those fields, you know, live animals. And, I mean, as fascinating as hunting sounds, I don't think the farmers would be very happy. Fair point. Hobbies outside of HEMA. Another thing that's a hobby, I mean, I'm sort of getting into medieval stuff quite a bit, really. I was previously quite interested in things like game design. I've been trying to help people like Adam Chapman. I mentioned this in my last live stream, which I do believe you were around at, but I'll say again that yeah, I was helping a game, Overtale, other things. So I quite like things like game development, but my proper hobbies are indeed, you know, close combat fighting, like I do in HEMA. Apart from that, archery, believe it or not, although I have been out of it for far too long, I actually really do love archery. It's just, I don't know, I've always loved projectile weapons. I like things like shotguns. I did skeet shooting at one point. I like, of course, using slings, javelins, throwing knives I used at the main melee, even though I couldn't get any footage. I enjoy crossbows. I've had a couple of chances with those, including actually I did that in my video for when I did that visit to the Royal Armouries Museum. So I love those, but the bow is definitely my favourite projectile weapon. In fact, I'd say possibly one of my favourite weapons of all time. But beyond archery and HEMA, so outside of combat, I like sort of, it's ironic because I'm utterly horrible at DIY stuff, so I'm a bit slow making things like IKEA, you know, even just putting together instruction given IKEA furniture or whatnot, but when I try, I like to attempt to do things like blade making and armouring, so that's why I have done a couple of videos on things like my attempt at making a knife, and when I was doing that really crude expansion on my armour, because I do like making things as well as destroying them. And, you know, I actually did, one of the things I did originally was that silly, horrible Chainmail Versus series, but it was out of the fact that I loved making armour. You know, I had my butted mail cheap shirt that I had originally, but afterwards I had this sort of set of choices that I was trying to make, and I had made it myself completely by hand. I bought the rings from Get Dressed for Battle. I had this 5-piece precision plier set from somewhere like Home Base, and I was, you know, putting all together ring by ring, and although I knew it wasn't proper riveted mail armour, it was so much fun just making it, and, you know, testing it out against things like hatchets and air rifles and whatever I had to hand. So I'd certainly love to do that again. Excuse me, I've actually stopped doing blacksmithing for the moment, A, because it's bloody hot. It's, you know, you can imagine you've got the hot sun, you've got to wear protective gear like aprons and sometimes goggles or ear defenders depending on what sort of equipment you're using, and gloves as well, that especially. And you're next to a very hot fire, and, you know, staying near it, it gets way too hot, so I might save that to maybe autumn, winter, something like that. But yeah, so I'd probably want to get into things like blade making. Perhaps I could talk about, I mean, I'd want to talk about maintenance and things like sharpening tools, but I've always felt like I'm not good enough at it to feel like I give instruction. I always want to, if I'm going to say, you know, how to do this, I don't want to be that person on YouTube who tells you how to do something and then it turns out it's wrong. Obviously, I'm always going to have some occasional moment, yeah, every so often where I actually am incorrect or maybe slightly off on a detail, but I don't ever want to make a video that is properly and entirely wrong, where I'm you know, causing people to do things like maybe damage their equipment or, you know, do sparring and things not in proper safety. So hence, that's why I haven't done those sorts of videos. But yeah, if I again, I bring up the Patreon and funding things, but I'd probably want to get. I have files, so I can turn those into things like blades. I can make some more attempts, trying to get heat treatment properly done, and I've got materials like wood and leather, which I've set aside for making handles. And I'd probably want to do a full tang design. I've got rivets as well, so I can experiment with those and maybe try to make proper blades and see how those turn out, or perhaps make other tools like hatchets, things like that, or whatever I can get my hands on and manufacture, to be honest, and go from there. But of course, I am quite amateur at the moment. I did some courses, some sort of single day and couple day courses in basic blacksmithing, making candle holders and that sort of stuff, with another course which is on simple blade making. But apart from that, I am basically completely inept, so I'm in a beginning stages, so I definitely can't do any how-to videos. I can sort of give pointers and say, well, I know I was taught to do such and such, but nothing more than that. So yeah, I could perhaps look at doing some blacksmithing, armor making, and those sorts of things. Since I'm not going to beg you guys for money on Patreon, and I'll just start the content and see how things develop from there. I'll definitely look at doing the archery videos. So in fact, again, I'll perhaps try after this live stream. I'll oh, where do I see PC Genie in 5 to 10 years? Well, to be honest, I initially was using YouTube. I didn't actually intend to directly make any money from being a YouTuber or using Patreon or those things. I didn't even know you could, to be honest. My initial intention was I wanted to use it as a sort of a bit like a CV, you know, a video representation of hire me for doing things like perhaps working in a museum or becoming a television presenter. Have you ever heard of characters like Mike Loads? They're the sorts of people who try to study stuff like HEMA. They don't just know the academic things like tactics and dates and, you know, political history about medieval warfare, but actually try to experience it firsthand as much as they can as a modern person. I basically wanted to become that, a sort of television presenter and someone who's always learning and always delivering information to it, people who are excited and interested to see information about history, and also to try and dispel the, you know, sort of misconceptions. So where I see PC Genie in 5 to 10 years, I've basically wanted to try and achieve that goal. I want to become a more informative channel. I want, you know, people to enjoy the content, and ideally I'd want it to become sustainable as a full-time job. Presently, I'll have to be blunt, this is a hobby right now. You know, as much as I love the idea of growing as a channel and seeing that subscriber count tot up, and, you know, seeing people saying they enjoy the videos and perhaps giving me tips and information that maybe I didn't realise when I was making the video, all of that interaction is fun, but it is presently a hobby, whereas in 5 to 10 years, I'd ideally want to become more professional and it become a genuine full-time job. Or even a part-time job alongside another, but at least something that can reliably make an income and I can dedicate to it, so I can perhaps, through investment and a return, call me a cynical sort of businessman, but I think that as sort of like a growing business, and you've got bigger investments and bigger returns, where I've been starting all the way at the beginning with, I had this cheap butted nail shirt and I'm shooting it with a training bow and an air rifle, which was just pure, you know, it was just rubbish. But it was a starting point. And I want to get to the point where in 10 years' time, I am someone who could be delivering things like proper, authentic, you know, maybe plate armor or brigandine or other things that I can afford to have destroyed and show them against genuine, you know, longbows made in the original style and have them with authentic arrows and give that sort of information and know more about HEMA and archery and those things, so I can... Yeah, that's a fair point. No, thanks. I'm glad I would. You think I'd be a good presenter on TV? I've always worried my rhetoric. Lindy Beige did a video about rhetoric and being a good speaker recently. I don't think sometimes I wonder if my rhetoric is a bit sort of off. You know, that kind of thing, like you'd have two history teachers or something. That's a good, best analogy. You know, and one of them sort of drones on, probably like I am, and makes the subject with so much information and so much to it seem so bloody boring, and then another person who's coming in to do the same job who makes it so exciting. So that, you know, that's another answer to where I want to see PC Genie channel in the next 5 to 10 years. I want to be more knowledgeable so I can give better quality information, but I also want it to be more interesting. I don't just want to know more and sort of pan it out at the camera and hope that someone in the universe is vaguely interested. I want people to actually, you know, be excited about the idea. You know, it's sort of like the real life of Game of Thrones. You know, looking at stuff like historical European martial arts. So yeah, this is, you know, you got these samurai and these cool skills. Well, here's the real deal for knights. Whoa, that, you know, that. Because stuff like HEMA, it's growing. It's certainly much bigger than it was. Other channels like Matt Easton mentioned, it's been going on since basically around when I was born, you know, the early 1990s. Excuse me. But it's growing more, and I'm hoping that I can help contribute to that, because, you know, of course, martial arts and things are good for exercise, but it's sort of interesting because, a bit like when I've been going to archery club, you've got that situation where people are also socialising and people are talking to each other about real history and all the exciting things that happened historically and all of that, which is, you know, I personally think is utterly riveting. I mean, I sometimes say that word sarcastically, but I really mean it this time. And I'm hoping that I can help other people, you know, become as interested as me. Not necessarily convert people who, you know, aren't really that interested and don't really give a damn, but people who are sort of interested and want to know more. I want to, you know, get them pent up and sort of think, wow, you know, this is exciting, and almost a bit like some people describe of some of the big channels in other subjects, like Jim Sterling on his Jimquisition. They say, you know, they say that they're excited and they're happy at, you know, I've even seen situations where people have commented on some videos where they say that they were having a bad day, and they were quite miserable and upset, and they just thought, oh, you know, can this get any worse? And then they come over to YouTube, and their favourite channel has gone and pumped up a video about an interesting topic, and then, boom, you know, it's made them happy again, because they've seen a fascinating topic covered by a personality they know and love. So I'd hope to become one of those. I'm making a LinkedIn profile, trying to find like-minded people. This is going to make me sound like I'm really not up with the times, but I mean, I've heard of LinkedIn, but I'm not. It's one of those things where I know that, you know, I know YouTube is a place for sharing videos. Facebook is sort of just for sending messages to people and posting statuses about your social life. And then Twitter is a sort of like a condensed version of that. And then you've got Patreon, which is, you know, where people fund each other. So you've got these things, but I've heard of LinkedIn, but I've never really understood, you know, what's its purpose. I mean, do you think it would help my channel? Or, you know, help people become interested in these things? I mean, it's going to sound a bit amateur of me, but what is LinkedIn? You know, I mean, I'll have a look after this video as well. I'll probably need to first look at trying to do archery, because the sun's going to set otherwise. But I'll have a look into LinkedIn and try to make a profile. Of course, I've tried to stretch out across social media, and I went on to Reddit. That's a funny little place. I wanted to have a look on there. Profile, talk about experiences and interests, based on that, getting jobs, opportunities, etc. Alright, so sort of like a public profile or blog, I guess. I suppose, yeah, in that case I'll probably have a look at making a LinkedIn profile. I mean, you know, I'm certainly happy to experiment these things. I've got all sorts of things from the that blog on WordPress, which nobody visited really ever since I put up that video. But anyway, excuse me. But also even up to the that silly radio show I set up, which I've still got the account to. It's a free account, so I can just keep that for whenever. But I don't know if I'd ever put podcasts or something on there, perhaps. But yeah, I'll have a look at experimenting with places like LinkedIn as well, and proceed from there. I've always wondered, I mean, I'm also trying to become more identifiable, you know, amongst various other YouTubers, and I've always wondered, I mean, I know I'll of course be answering your questions as they come up, but I'll ask a question myself. I was wondering, is there anything sort of iconic or noticeable about my channel? You know, is there anything about my... I mean, I've tried to experiment with lots of things that can try to keep in people's memory, like doing the silly introducing and calling people, you know, the illustrious investors or fellow fighters and all of those every time, and trying that jacket, the big red jacket, and always having a weapon in videos, having a beard, all about. But I didn't know if anything's ever sort of created a lasting impression, or if anything sort of memorable about me and my channel, because obviously, again, not to speak of this like it's just some cynical business, but you know what people tend to call a USP or unique selling point. Of course, it's a bit like, I think it was Confucius who says, who keeps the old a kindle and adds new knowledge is fit to be a teacher. That sort of thing. It's that idea where, of course, you don't just want to regurgitate what knowledge and facets of entertainment already exist, but you also want to add something new and try and contribute something before I die, which hopefully will be in about a century. Yeah, I don't know. Perhaps indeed I should look to my roots. Might be the archery and such things that will... Yeah, it's eccentric behaviour. Alright. So I know sometimes I wonder if I sound sort of unprofessional almost. I've got, you know, all these people who are very knowledgeable and of course present information much more concise and less rambly than me, and clearly have earned many hundreds of thousands of subscribers for doing so, and I always wondered if I just sort of, like I'm doing now I guess, rambling on too much, and if my eccentric behaviour was bad. But okay, if it's... I mean, I've always... It's funny, I tend to get it brought out more around people like Ryan. That was why I quite liked having him on my channel, because it brought out the eccentric behaviour. Just like when I was doing that thing with the Xanima gameplay, and I was cracking him up a few times with saying stuff how he loves his flight simulators and driving simulators and all sorts of other things. I just ends up just putting him under an umbrella term as, you know, you and your movement simulators, and he properly cracked up on that. So yeah, I guess I could use my eccentric behaviour to my advantage. So yeah, maybe I'll pop in a few moments of madness and try to spice up videos by just, yeah, maybe I'll just... I mean, I was kind of restricting myself because I do sometimes... It's weird, it's maybe stage fright first. I sometimes get a bit kind of nervous or reserved when I'm on camera, and I just sort of end up in a dry sense. It's a bit like when someone's asked you in school or in church to read something, you know, even though I've got a clear voice and people can understand me, it just ends up coming across just basic and dry. But if people like my eccentric and my sort of peculiarities, then perhaps I can play them to my advantage and maybe cause a few... Yeah, maybe I can do that whole edutainment thing. I can have the usual subjects, but maybe add a silly element of my personality and spice it up and maybe keep the interest going whilst in the background delivering the information and, you know, the topics that are important. It's like I remember in sort of classical studies, teacher was mentioning how there was this sort of play which was around the time of a war, one of the wars between the Athenians and the Spartans, and the whole topic in the background was that, of course, they were saying, look, you know, war is bad, everyone's getting hurt, fathers are burying sons, and all sorts of grim topics like that. But they had this, it was a comedy play, and held all these, this silly premise that eventually the wives got fed up, and they said, you know what, we'll have a sort of a sex boycott. And they wouldn't satisfy their husbands until they gave up the war, and they sort of got increasingly impatient and ended the war, and that was the whole premise of the comedy. I can't remember what it was called. Huh. Okay. What have been up to? It's a fair point. Admittedly, it's... Well, yeah, I suppose I could go over... Yeah, in fact, I should probably. I mean, I've been a bit cautious around the Iron Door Collective, the club that I train with, because I don't want to be seen as an official representation, because I'm not as good as most of the people teaching. Obviously, there's the people teaching me, that's why I'm going there, because I'm learning from them a lot. But they were also saying, you know, if I post up videos, they're okay with the idea of me doing things like recording fights occasionally when I can, with people who are willing to at the club, but they didn't want me to start trying to, you know, act as if I was their sort of, you know, as if I was representing them. So I guess I got a bit cautious there, but I suppose I can still do things like go home and after a session maybe start talking about the concepts that have cropped up and the sorts of things I have learnt in general to do with HEMA without necessarily explicitly mentioning them, perhaps. And it's like I could perhaps... I remember in my... when I did the thing about my review of the main melee, that event I went to, I mentioned, of course, I was the different things I was learning there, so perhaps I could do something a bit like that, but more regularly about what I'm learning in general, perhaps. Because I mentioned there I'd learnt about some exotic new techniques and things like how to use sort of lunging about using a rotella, which is sort of like a strapped shield, big round shield, almost like a hoplon, and doing things like the shield howl, which actually in that video I've got going now, since you can't see my face, I've got a webcam, where you're using sort of reverse edge. I'm not showing it at the moment, but we've got things like the reverse edge and doing these sort of weird twisting movements, and they're called stuff like the shield howl and Zwirtschaft, which are these German types of methods. They're simple, but I mean, you know, they're simple in concept compared to some of the more complex techniques, but yet they can give a significant tactical advantage because of the dynamics of where the cut lands and where you'd end up binding and those sorts of things. So yeah, I definitely could do that. In fact, just trying to think, what did I learn in the last... This is going to be interesting, it's on Sunday, so maximum time to forget, but what I learned from last time, I remember we were doing... Actually, what were we doing? We were doing things like... Ah, yes, we were doing some almost like sort of melee games this time, because we were, rather than doing drills around a flowing drill, we're just going around using sort of doing a parry, a beat, and a deflection. Huh? See? Oh, I don't get it. Okay, I've got slow mode on. I know you're going to have to wait 12 or 15 seconds to see what you were trying to say. But you're looking at basically doing various defences against the you know, different people coming in. You'd have one person standing there, and there'd be a queue of people, and they'd line up at different points, and whatever point they were coming from, they would execute, say, a high attack or a low cut or something like that, you had to parry it, and of course there wasn't as much of a delay behind each other, so you had to kind of have one parry lead into the next and kind of almost fend multiple people at once, but it was just rapidly... Alright, that's nice. Okay, that's fine. But, you know, having all of these different parries and things being done at once. And that's a fair point. Can't believe I never did this. Oh, I suppose it's, again, the problem that I need to find someone like Ryan in my local area to show the techniques, but I still haven't shown the three main types of defense. We've got a parry, where you just sort of put your weapon in the way and stop an attack. A beat, where you deliberately attack into the attack and sort of hit their weapon out of the way by bouncing it off. And then a deflection, where you, or sort of carry along, whatever you want to call it, where you take the opponent's weapon basically in the same direction they were swinging, but make them deliberately overswing past you. So you can, in all of those situations, of course, follow up with something. And suffice it to say, the different defenses lead to different opportunities and advantages each time. And if someone does that to you, parries you, beats your weapon aside, deflects you further along, the things you can do to counter that also change. It's really fascinating. So perhaps if I can get a partner, I can do some information around that. But yeah, so I think you're right. So in the meantime, I should probably maybe drop the sword for a bit and maybe look at doing, well, mixtures between sort of sword fighting and those sorts of techniques, topics, and looking at things like archery again. So I'm looking at my bow right now. It's in my bedroom. I've kept it nice and preserved. Most of my arrows are still intact, so I could certainly just bring them out and get that done. In fact, when it hits about seven in, well, that many minutes, I shall probably wrap this up and try to get some archery done. Because luckily the sun seems to be staying out quite late today. And then I can look at those sorts of things. So, I mean, did you particularly want anything covered, you know, in terms of archery dynamics? Did you want me to discuss anything about bows you wanted to know about? Or did you just want a raw sort of speed shooting attempt, or sort of maybe even showing archery tips, like on the knock, draw and loose and those sorts of things, or what? Because I probably can just look at producing a video, getting into it. Of course, don't need that much preparation when you're just going and doing the shooting. Excuse me. Which I can probably do just later today. So that might be something worth trying out. But yeah, again, I mean, one of my main problems is, because I currently still need to find a job, so little money, I've been having the problem of trying to find what I can invest in. Oh, archery tips. Okay. Yeah, I can give archery tips. In fact, I mean, I'm probably not confident enough, because it's been so long. I'm not confident enough to do sort of advanced tips, because there's a chance that I'll actually end up having bad habits and maybe giving the wrong advice. But I can certainly talk about tips around the basics, like an anchor point, how to knock an arrow properly. But yeah, maybe some basic beginner archery would be good. Because I mean, I did a video years ago where it was Johnny teaches his best friend. No, it was PC Genie teaches flyboy theory archery, and he had the bow I got him for a birthday present, and that sort of banter went on, but it wasn't as good. So yeah, maybe I could do a proper instructional video, so I'll look into doing that. That maybe will take some preparation, but the sun doesn't even seem to be setting much, so hopefully that means I can have enough time to prepare something with more information. But yeah, there's an idea. I mean, I guess I end up condensing a lot of things and waffling so much in videos. Maybe I should, I don't know what you guys think, but perhaps I should, instead of doing big chunky videos, maybe I should split them into parts. So maybe rather than doing a whole "this is how you do archery" kind of video, or at least its basics, I could have maybe individual parts, like, you know, quick videos on how to nock an arrow properly, how to, you know, what is an anchor point and why is it so important, and various things like that. I gotta wonder where things like my archery glove and my bracer are. It's been so long, I probably need to dig around in my mess of a bedroom and try to find out where the old equipment is. But yeah, once I've got that already, I can probably produce a video on that. Well, produce many videos on that, in fact. Start looking into various tips. Maybe I could split them along and have sort of videos on HEMA topics, then a video on archery topic, and then going back around and maybe have various topics and then go from there. So perhaps that could work. So I notice sometimes I have a habit of doing kind of almost like a series. I did about 3 or 4 videos with a sling, then I've done tons of videos on my brigandine armour, and then stuff on, it almost seemed like it was too specialist, and someone just visiting the channel would think, oh, I wanted more on X topic that happened 3 months ago, but then I don't. So yeah, maybe if I split it up with archery tips every now and then yeah, we can get that up. Yeah, it's alright. Tell you what, I mean, it is 3 minutes to 7. I should probably get set up, so I will end the live stream here, and then, like I say, I'll go over and get the camera ready and prepare for, well, a video topic on archery archery video on archery topics. So see you later, guys, and have a very good day. Bye.